Hey folks, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to start a new build, a K-bar. But not only are we starting one K-bar, not two K-bars, we're going to do 3 K-bars. So I got some Marines that were interested, totally different, totally separate contacts from a couple of Marines that wanted K-bars. One guy wanted one that was a bit smaller, and the other two want full-size K-bars. So this is going to be a K-bar build. I've never done one, so we're going to make 3. Let's get to it. All 3 of these K-bars are going to be copper Damascus. So the first thing I got to do is make the Damascus for the cladding. Here I'm using alternating layers of 1095 and 15N20 steel. I'm starting this billet with 31 layers. We're going to cut and restack it to add some layers later. I'm welding up the seams, then it's going in the forge to heat up. Now we're setting the welds in the press. Like always, I do 3 heats of just setting the weld, then I'll start to draw it out. You'll see that I'm pressing on the corners. That's because when I welded the edges of the billet, I think I got it a little skewed, so I'm trying to fix that. Now that it's all nice and forge welded, I'm squaring up the sides, getting ready to draw this out. I'm only going to be cutting this in 3, so I don't need to draw it out that much. This will end up with 93 layers, which is kind of a medium layer count, because I want it to be nice and bold. You'll see that my process is just alternating heats between the drawing dies and the flattening dies. That's pretty much how things work. Now the last heat, just flattening this thing out, remove all the bumps from the drawing dies, and then we're going to do one final heat just to square it up nice and flat before we chop it up. I've already cut these up on the bandsaw, ground the mating surfaces, and now we're welding them up to go right back into the forge. First, a little dip in kerosene just so it seeps into the edges. It'll burn off and burn off any oxygen with it. And now more of the same, setting the forge weld and then drawing it out. We're going to be cutting it into 3 again, but we're not going to be doing a restack. We're going to be doing something different with each of those. Remember, I'm going to be using this as cladding with some other stock that's 1.5 inches wide, so that's why I'm narrowing this down. Some people ask me why I have 2 sets of drawing dies, the really aggressive round ones and then these flatter ones. I like these less aggressive ones because they leave the steel relatively flat. The really aggressive ones put a lot of big dents in the steel, and you got to correct those later. But those certainly have their uses, and you'll see coming up. I'm almost done with the billet as it is. I'm stretching it out, and then I'm going to cut it up into 3. The first third I'm going to use for that small K-bar. It's going to be the cladding for both sides. The other 2 pieces are each going to be the cladding of one other K-bar. The last K-bar I'm not going to use Damascus for. Here's the first of the 3 pieces. I'm using the aggressive dies here to draw this one out because I don't want to add any width. This piece is going to get stretched out long enough that we can divide it into two, and it's going to become ladder Damascus for the cladding of the small K-bar. Now that I've got the billet all flattened out, the way ladder Damascus works is you cut grooves in the steel, and then you're going to go and flatten those out, and that will bring the underlying layers up to the surface. In this heat, I'm onto one of the other two pieces. This one I'm using my special dies to make wave Damascus. There's a picture in the corner here of what these dies actually look like. This is a similar process to ladder Damascus, except I'm pressing in grooves, so then I'm going to grind off the high spots, and that'll expose our layers underneath. So I've got all the metal for my 3 billets all ready. One thing I wanted to remind folks, because I made this mistake. I was thinking, I wanted my center to be a little thicker, so I had 1095 in the center, and I was just going to stack some thin 15N20. And then, good thing I didn't weld this up yesterday, because when I went to bed, I'm realizing, that would be stupid. Because remember, you're not going to get this up into forge welding temps, so these 3 layers would never stick together. You have to have a copper between every single layer. That's what's adhering your layers together. So we cannot do those two. It has to be just the single layer of 1095. So that's what we're going to be going to. This one is 15 and 20 on the outside, so there's no Damascus in this one technically. This one is the wave Damascus on the outside. Let's remove, like I said, remove those. Okay, so that's going to be that billet. And the smaller one, because this is only a 5-inch knife, this has the ladder Damascus on the outside. All right, let's weld these up and we'll get them in the forge. So after a half-hour welding, I got these all welded up. It's not pretty, but there they are. You got to make sure you get all of these seams welded up. Let's get them in the forge. Now that the billet is up to temperature, I'm giving it some good hard presses to fuse the layers together. You'll notice that the temperature of the billet is much less than before. We just need to draw it out to the length and thickness that we want. This is an important step. With the aggressive rounding dies, I'm going to put some deep valleys, and that's going to give us that heartbeat-like pattern in the copper. I wanted to make sure my billets were long enough for these blades, so I started to forge in the tang. You'll see in a minute, I really didn't need to do this. After doing this process on all 3 Kumai billets, I thought it was done, let them anneal. Here I'm grinding them down just to check the edges. So here are the 3 billets all forged out, but there's a problem. They're just too thick. After grinding off the sides, I'm just noticing that they're way too thick, and even if I tried to grind them, I will have ground down all of the cladding, which is no good. So, unfortunately, I'm going to have to take these back to the forge and thin them out about twice as much, just so that I get the thickness that I need, and they're not too thick. They're way too thick right now. So, unfortunately, back to the forge, which means I got to weld all the edges again. Let's go do it. That was one issue here, doing the double layers of copper on each side. You just can't grind it down that much. I'm slightly worried about making the core too thin, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, so here we are all reforged. I went and take the edge off one side, and you can see now quite a bit thinner. Definitely what I want here. I've also just taken one side down and etched so you can see the pattern. Hopefully you can see that a little bit. This is the small one, the 5-inch K-bar, 5-inch blade, and this is a ladder pattern. This one is going to be the full-size K-bar. This is with the wave Damascus pattern, which you can see here. It's not quite as pronounced up on this end of the billet, but that's okay because that's mostly where the tang's going to be. But right here it looks pretty cool if you guys can see that. And then this one is the 15N20 core. Also a good thickness. I've cut out my pattern and I've put it on the knife. I'm using some blue Dykem and now I'm just tracing around it to get ready to do the profiling. Most of the excess material was cut off with the bandsaw. Now I'm on the grinder. I did save a piece to use for the guards. I've got a 36 grit belt and I'm hogging off most of the material here just to get a rough profile. So here are the 3 blades after doing a bit of profiling. Next thing is we're going to remove some width. So you can tell they're still pretty wide, but I've still got a lot to be able to remove here. So let's take them to the surface grinder and thin them out. It's important to be continually checking the core and making sure it's centered so that we don't have any issues when we go to grind the bevel. I've put the grinder in horizontal mode and now it's time to refine the pattern. Here I'm checking the width from front to back just to make sure the blade is the right width all the way along. Alright, we got these all to width, which is great. Now I'm going to take them to the mill. We're going to do the fullers in both sides of each one, and I'm also going to be milling the tangs. These are the stacked leather handles, and yes, folks, I purchased these. There is no point in me making these when I can buy a whole set for $7. So, yeah, purchase them. So I want to just fit the tang to these discs. So I'll be milling the tang, and then I also, since I'm going to just sit it in the mill, I'll mill both sides so it's perfectly level with the knife and I don't get any wonkiness. All right, let's go do the mill and do some work. I'm using a 1/2-inch ball end mill, and this is one that gives a rounded bottom. So this way I can just pass that mill back and forth across the blade, and that'll give me my fuller. This may look quick, but this process actually took a couple hours to finish on all the blades. Now I'm using a 1/4-inch end mill just to do the tang. I think it's cool the way the chips are all magnetic and have stuck to the tang. So this is after about 2 hours and just a few chips. So I'm finally done all that mill work. I've got the fullers all milled. I think they look really good. Very little chatter, so they're nice and smooth. And you can see actually how centered the billet is. If you see roughly the same amount of copper coming through on each side. See here, you see just, if you guys can see it, that much, and about the same on the other side. This one you can tell is a wee bit off center at the top here because you can see there's the double layer of copper here, but not much of the second layer peering through. But if I look at the edge here, it looks really close, maybe just a 0.001 or something, or 0.002 extra on this side, so that won't be noticeable once we grind the bevels. All right, gonna take a little break and then come back and start on the bevels.
I forgot that before I do the main bevel, I want to do that top bevel on the false edge. For that, I'm using my file jig. Oops.
Dad, you should be more careful.
Now it's time to put in the rough bevels before heat treat. I'm starting with a steep angle, but then we'll work the bevel up the blade until almost reaching the fuller. This is actually a pretty easy knife to grind. The bevel is completely straight, the plunge line is completely perpendicular to the rest, so it's about as easy as it gets. I guess the curve at the front, that's about the only tricky part. It only took me about half an hour to grind all three blades, which is really quick. Grind them only using a 36 grit belt, and now we're ready for heat treat. I've already normalized the blade and gone through a couple rounds of grain refinement. Now it's time to quench. The core is 1095, so this is Parks 50 that we're quenching in. That was the 5-inch K-bar. Now it's time for the 7-inch. And here goes the third. All the quenches seemed to go perfectly, no warps, no issues, everything went great. All the blades were still pretty hot, so I decided to put each one in between my aluminum quench plates just to cool them down and make sure they're straight. You can see those striking copper lines in the blade, but now it's time to do the final grinding. Here I'm starting with one of Broadbeck's 120 grit Revolution belts. Then I'm going to move up to a 240 Game Changer belt. Now I'm continually comparing the copper on either side just to make sure that bevel's centered. These came out perfect.
So here are the blades after final grinding. They're all the way up to 240. I've done the flats as well. And for those that commented before on the Instagram post, after I did the initial bevel, saw copper on the edge. Well, that always happens because the edge was like the thickness of a nickel. So now that they're final grind, you see the copper is not on the edge. So these look pretty good. I'm pretty happy with these. Now the long process of hand sanding, which means hand sanding these fullers, which is not a fun process. I'm going to start with the fullers, and I'm using a little 1/2-inch round piece that I've kind of beveled the edges, and it fits nicely in the groove. Okay, it's time to do this area and this area here, because those you can never reach with the little piece. So what I like to do is I just have a punch, and I just wrap the sandpaper almost at the edge of the punch, and I'm really just going to use that edge and then I can get right into that corner. The only problem is you gotta keep going with the sandpaper quite often because it wears it out because you're right on the sharp edge. Here we are with the blades all hand sanded to 800. That's what took me so long in this part of the build here, because there's 3 of them. I didn't think you guys wanted to watch hours of hand sanding. Now we are on to the handles. So this is just the 2 different sizes, the big one and the 5-inch one. So before we get to the handles, I'm going to do the guards. And for the guards, I've got this piece, this cutoff of one of the Damascus pieces that we used. So you can see that this is, yeah, it's about the thickness of this, which is good. And you can see that it kind of comes up, there's like a taper here, which is nice because then it will expose the copper in these layers, which I think will look really cool. So that's what we're going to do. And I have this, I'm going to cut it down the center so I have enough for 2 of them. So the 2 Damascus blades will get this. And then the one that doesn't have Damascus is just going to have a mild fitting, which you'll see what I'm going to do to the pommel. It's going to match all of them perfectly. Okay, so let's cut this up, and then we're going to go to the mill and do the slot.
I like to drill multiple holes in the slot for the guard before I use an end mill. Using a drill is just way faster than using an end mill. Then you can just go back and clean it up. Much faster, guys, and it saves your end mills.
So I still have the guard and the pommel to make, but I wanted to start thinking about the stacked leather handle. So the first thing I need to do is, these holes were just a little too narrow. These won't go in. So I'm just taking these on the drill press, widening them out so that they fit. Let's do that. So I've got all the leather pieces resized, so these all fit well now. Now I want to talk about how I'm going to squeeze these together. So what I want to do is get all these on here. I'm not going to just do it in front of you here, but get all these on here. I want to be able to press them all together, and of course these are all going to be filled with epoxy. They're all going to be epoxied together. Then you need to clamp them really tight. But I don't want to do it on the knife because then it's really hard to, there's going to be a guard on this, so it's really hard to form these. So what I want to be able to do is put them all in, clamp them down, and be able to slide the handle out. Because then once they're all glued up together, I want to be able to, I'll probably drill a hole through the center, the very center that's a little bigger, put a threaded rod through, and then put them on the lathe, and then turn this shape with these little notches on the lathe. So how am I going to do that? So what I came up with was this. I just took these 2 pieces of angle iron, I kind of put them together, cut them on my my metal chop saw, and then what I'm going to do is put this in here. Put these, if I can get them on, you know, basically sit this in here, glue them, epoxy them all together. I'll put some Vaseline. Why is this one so hard? Put some Vaseline on the handle, and then I'll clamp, at the end, I'm going to clamp these together really, really tight. And since there's Vaseline on the handle, pretend this is really long, I'll be able to just pull that out. Nice. All right. So I've got my little contraption all set up. I've actually already done this once off camera just to make sure it would work. And this is what I did the first time for this knife. It's a little smaller, so there's a few more rings, but it's perfectly aligned. It goes in, so total success. Problem with this one is that it's a little longer than the tang. See, there's going to be a piece of all thread that's welded on the back here. So I'm actually going to do this one in 2 pieces and then do those together. So I'm actually going to be doing this twice to make 2 times and then 2 times to make 2 full handles. And of course, I'm going to be using 24-hour epoxy for this. Don't try to do this with 5-minute epoxy. I think it took me 20 minutes to do this one, so 5-minute epoxy would be no bueno. I got my stacked leather handle all epoxied up. I've got it on a 3/8 inch rod here and kind of bolted to it with washers on either side. Now I'm going to turn it on the lathe, and I'm going to get that kind of hourglass shape to it. And then I'll also put in those grooves with a tool on the lathe here. I've already done one, the small one here, so that's what it's going to look like just as a test one. This one needs to be burnished a little more, but that's what it's going to look like.
The more I have a lathe, the more I find uses for it. Using the lathe here for the handle was just a no-brainer. Being able to take this down to the diameter I needed really quickly, that was very, very useful. Now that I have it down to the right diameter, time to put those tapers into it. It also makes it really easy to sand it. So here I'm just taking some 220 sandpaper just to smooth it out. First, a quick measure to make sure I have them the right distance apart. Then I'm going to use a lathe tool just to cut those grooves. Yep, that's right. I used a black Sharpie to put the color in the grooves. And now some tan leather dye just to give it the right color. And finally, a burnishing tool to give it that nice, shiny, polished finish.
So there's the finished handle. I like it.
Hey folks, are you enjoying the channel but looking for a way to support it? Well, here's how. Join my Patreon. Here's all the perks that you're going to get. There's a link down in the description. I'd love for you to support the channel.
So I have the slot milled in the guard. This is for the small one. What I want to do next is to mill down kind of the bottoms of this so that it's got, which looks like a spacer. You'll see what I mean. But what I'm going to use is a ball end mill and just take off this area here. And then I'll come back with a flat end mill and just do that. I wish I had a rotary table, because then I would put this in and I would be able to spin this part, but I don't, so we're going to do it by hand.
I decided it would make more sense to use the flat end mill and take it down, and then just do the edges with the ball end mill.
Okay folks, we're ready to start the next phase of this project, and that is doing the pommel. So the way I'm going to do the pommel, I've got a piece of 1 1/4 inch round stock chucked up in the lathe here. First operation is to drill and tap the hole, because this is actually going to be going to screw onto a piece of all thread. So I already have a center drill bit that I just drilled a tiny little hole, and now I've got the drill bit to drill the hole for the threads. And I got to make sure I don't go too far. That's going to go through the end here. So it's got to be about 40 thousandths, 400 thousandths through here, and then we'll put the shape to it, and we'll know where to cut it off. All right, let's get to it. Now we're just going to replace the chuck with a live center, and this just spins and will sit right in that hole, and it'll support this as we use the lathe. There. All right, we'll take our measurements off here. It's a 1/2 inch, and then we'll start putting our contour in it.
I know I say this every time, but I really love using the lathe. And now I look for excuses to use the lathe on projects. It only took me about 10 or 15 minutes to get the shape I needed. Then I moved on to a chainsaw file just to get that perfect smooth bevel.
I figured before I cut this off, I better tap the hole. I've actually flattened one end so this would stay securely in the vise. So I'm going to need this tap and also the spiral tap to get to the very bottom.
I know there's machinists watching saying, why didn't you just tap it in the lathe? Well, I've never done that before, but I actually did it for the second and third one, and yes, it's a lot easier. Let me tell you folks, it was a lot easier to grind and sand the pommels than it was the guards. Cylindrical things are easy to grind and sand. Now I'm cutting the slot for the all thread. It's much better to do this than to try to weld it on the end.
I'm ready to weld the all thread onto the ends of the tangs. And guys, it's super important, tape up your blade fully before you do this. Because if you were to just ground the board and then set the knife on it, if the knife moves, you'll get spots all over the knife from the connection. So make sure you tape up the blade, and ask me how I know this. So I've got the positive connected directly to the knife here. And then I'm just going to weld each one. All right, let's do it. Okay, we're going to try this again with the right gas. I went to air gas earlier. They gave me argon instead of MIG, which I asked for and paid for. All right, now let's do it with the right gas.
The next step is to put some shape on these guards. Here I'm using a round nut just to use as a contour for my profile.
All right, it's time to put the bends in each of the flares on the guard. I'm going to do this cold. Hopefully this works okay. This hasn't been hardened, so let's hope.
I've run a couple of normalization cycles on the guards just to make sure they're not brittle, and now it's time to quench them and do this so the Damascus pattern matches. Here I'm putting my maker's mark in the ricasso of all 3 blades, then I'll do a final sanding.
Alright, time to etch. First thing I'm going to do is the guards. Wash them off carefully in acetone. So you can see some of the grease that's coming off them. And I like to wear gloves for this, just to make sure I don't have any other grime go on them. Here goes. Okay, here we go. I've got the pommels and the mild steel guard. I got my blackening solution. I've got the stuff cleaning in the cleaning solution, and now I'm going to drop it in the blackening solution. I'm starting the timer. It should be about 10 minutes.
The neighbors decided to cut the grass right when I pulled them out. Here I'm washing them, then I'll go inside, clean them, and then let them soak in mineral oil. Time to hammer on the guards for the final time.
I've got the final stain on all 3 handles. I've put them all on the lathe here just to do some final burnishing before the glue up. So I got everything set up, ready for glue up. The pommels came out really nice and black. They're a little dirty right now because I did a test fit, but they're going to shine up really nice. I hammered on all the guards to fit exactly with the handles. I'm going to leave the handles on. I'm going to pour the epoxy down and just hand tighten as much as I can the pommels, and we should be good to go.
Thanks for joining me on this build, folks. I love doing these K-bars. It was certainly a challenge doing the stack leather handles. Some new techniques that I learned here. The hot blackening of the fittings was cool, and you'll see that in some upcoming episodes. So 2 of these are sold, the small one and the large non-Damascus one, both going to Marines. The big one is going to Ed, who I think he said he's going to go to his mom, Linda. So congrats, Linda. Your son has commissioned this knife for you. So guys, the last one, the big Damascus one, will be available, but again, it's going to go to patrons first. So Patreon members will get the first crack at purchasing that knife. So it will be up there as soon as the day after this video launches. So if you're not a Patreon member, why don't you consider subscribing and becoming a member if you want a chance to get a purchase of this knife. Thanks guys, we'll see you on the next build.